Now, Led Zeppelin IV is quite a hard album to review because this album is so incredibly popular and has become so legendary over the years of its existence. And this album is incredibly influential. There are a lot of elements of this album that can be heard throughout albums that would be made throughout decades after the release of this album. Now, going into more detail, the name. The name is its own subject area. Now, obviously, most people, me included, know this album by the name of Led Zeppelin IV. That's what most people recognize it as, and that's how I recognize it. But there's also Zoso, and there's also Four Symbols now, because this is the era when the four members of the band got their own sort of symbols, and Zoso is Jimmy Page's symbol. And other than that, there aren't that many other names. Those are the main ones: Led Zeppelin IV, Zoso, and Four Symbols. I haven't heard it being called anything else. Now let's talk about the artwork just really quickly. The artwork, I don't really know what it is. It looks really weird. It's like a painting on the wall with like a guy scraping some leaves or something. I don't know what it is. I don't care, because it's all about the music. Led Zeppelin are one of those bands where it's just all about the music. The music is all really anybody cares about. So yeah, artwork, not really relevant. Now, this album, as I've had, is incredibly legendary, and it's definitely Led Zeppelin's most famous album. I do not know whether I should call it their best. It's definitely up there. It's incredibly influential, and it's incredibly accessible, yet also really brilliant. This, for me, sets the blueprint for how every commercially successful album should be. It can be really commercially successful. I have nothing against music that's really popular and really commercially successful, but this album is still incredibly, good and not particularly complex in some areas, but still definitely has that really good writing element to it. Now, they recorded this album in a studio at Headley Grange, and the production is absolutely fantastic. Jethro Tull also recorded here. They recorded Aqualung, which doesn't sound very good at all, but this album has brilliant production, even better than the first three albums, which already had brilliant production. It sounds, as I've said, this whole album has a much more accessible sound. Stylistically, it's not as sort of first two albums where it's really hardcore blues, and the third album, which is more of a folk side. This sort of has all those elements, but toned down a little bit to make it more accessible. But that's fine, because the writing is still amazing. Now, talking more about the production, the guitar sound is brilliant. Love the guitar sound. Bass isn't as good as Led Zeppelin II or some of the early stuff, but it's still really, really good bass sound. The drums sound fantastic. Some amazing, crisp, clean drumming. Just absolutely amazing. Really, John Bonham's technical talent coming through all the way. Just brilliant production. Love it all around. Now, the performance is also fantastic. I mean, Led Zeppelin are incredibly technically talented. Robert Plant's vocals, doing some of the folkier stuff on songs like Going to California, and doing the balladry on, obviously, Stairway To Heaven, and more of the kind of rock and roll, just kind of more faster in your face stuff. Does it beautifully, brilliant. Not my favorite Robert Plant performance vocally. I just think at some points he's not quite going all the way. He's not as emotionally convincing. On a technical level, Robert Plant turns in a great performance. I just don't think he quite has that emotional edge that he has on Led Zeppelin I, where you hear his bluesiness and it felt so real. It doesn't quite have that, but on a purely technical basis, it's a brilliant performance. So it's still a good performance, just lacks a bit of that really hardcore emotion just to make you really believe the lyrics that he is singing. And Jimmy Page, obviously great performance, just beautiful guitar work, a beautiful mix of the acoustic stuff and the electric stuff. Obviously, the electric stuff sounds great. It sounds heavy, but it can also be more of the balladry kind of stuff with the electric guitar. Acoustic guitar also sounds great. Jimmy Page, just great guitar player. John Paul Jones, great job, very fantastic bass player, and John Bonham, as we have already said, just a brilliant drummer, turning in an absolutely amazing performance. Now this album, the whole style of this album is, as I've said, it's almost like Led Zeppelin I, but the stylistic elements are like the folkiness and the bluesiness and the kind of hippie stuff and all the elements that they're taking in, some of the more Eastern stuff and maybe some Moroccan influence, some world music influences, are all there, but at a lesser degree. And that's what makes this album as much of a commercially successful hit, because at its core, it's just a good rock album. That's just what this album is. But when you really look deep into it, there's a lot of influences, but they're not as obvious as Led Zeppelin I, where you just hear it and you straight away think blues, or Led Zeppelin III, you hear it straight away think folk. So that's kind of stylistically how this album is. It's very varied, but it's able to be toned back to the level where it could be commercially successful. Now this album, considering how commercially successful it is, isn't really that revolutionary or kind of changing the game completely. Not like completely game-changing stuff like Jimi Hendrix or something like that. It's just going with the norm of what was happening at the time. But this album is completely carried on just brilliant writing, brilliant music, and extremely influential music. Right, so now let's move into the track by track. Now this album opens with Black Dog, which is an amazing song. Very famous riff. Incredible riff. One of my favorite Led Zeppelin riffs, and actually written by John Paul Jones, interestingly. And this is where you really realize how important John Paul Jones is to Led Zeppelin. Writing this brilliant riff, it's more complex than something like the Immigrant Song riff or maybe Whole Lotta Love, but it's incredible. And this is more than just riff. It's more of a complete song than just a riff. And there's it's actually kind of progressive at times, a little bit. They sneak it in there, but there is a few progressive elements. Like there's like this time change in the middle. You think after they play a song a bit, it's going to go at a steady time, but no, they change it up, and it sounds great. It really works well. The vocal performance is really good with changing from the a cappella vocals, and then you go into the riff, and a great solo, and just a really good opener for Led Zeppelin IV. And now we move on to Rock and Roll. Now this is another really famous song by the band. It's obviously got the drum intro. The drum intro isn't particularly special, but I don't mind it. It sounds okay. It kind of reminds me of Living Loving Maid off Led Zeppelin II. And it's just a really good groove, really catchy, really good kind of radio song. It's a good solo, not that complex, not Led Zeppelin doing anything spectacular, but yeah, it's just a really good song. They keep it short, and it's a nice song. It doesn't feel like it drags. So now we move on to the Battle of Evermore. Now, this is quite an interesting track. It's starting with the acoustic, folkier stuff, and we got guest vocals by Sandy Denny, which are good. Can't really hear them that much because you mainly just hear Robert Plant's voice, but yeah, good. Great acoustic work as always by Jimmy Page, and yeah, it's just a really great song to lead into Stairway to Heaven. Again, showing off how varied the band is. You got the couple of rockers at the start, moving into a nice folky track, and it all meshes together and feels like a really tight unit. That's one thing that I mentioned on Led Zeppelin I, is how Led Zeppelin are able to incorporate so many different influences, but make it all flow together and feel like a really complete album, and make it feel like a complete piece of music. And now Stairway to Heaven, I mean, it's the greatest song in the world. It's kind of, in a way, easy to review the song and hard to review at the same time, because this song is so famous. But this song is quite subtle, actually, for, the greatest song in the world. It's quite subtle in how brilliant it is, which this song is definitely extremely brilliant. I'll just talk you through it in case you haven't heard it, but I'm pretty sure most people would have heard it by now. It's got a beautiful balladry with the electric guitars at the start, just really soft, We got the flute playing in the background. It's just absolutely amazing. This would be the power ballad that every single power ballad ever released since this album would try to be as good at, but would fail, basically. It's really iconic, this song. And it just got some beautiful vocals at the start. This song is Led Zeppelin's, by far, Led Zeppelin's most famous song, but it's not really reflective of what Led Zeppelin, most people think Led Zeppelin are, which is, you know, hard rock and heavy metal, I suppose. But yeah, it's just really, really slow, really good building up. It never feels like it drags, this song. That's the sign of a really good ballad, is when it all feels paced properly. It doesn't really start getting a little bit faster till when John Bonham comes in, which is already minutes and minutes into the song. Now the lyrics are quite complex. They're not really talking about anything real. They only have phonetic meaning. But when you start thinking about it, you can kind of draw your own conclusions about what they mean. So I'm not going to tell you what the lyrics mean. You're going to have to draw your own conclusions for that. But yeah, Robert Plant's vocal performance from the start, where he's singing really soft, to by the end, after the guitar solo, which we'll talk about, is just really, really fast, really hard rock at the end. And so yeah, as I've mentioned, it has the amazing pacing, just a beautiful, beautiful melodic song. Great drumming. It's a really, really epic song. And now we get to the guitar solo. Now, the guitar solo I actually have a bit of an issue with, because my favorite version of the song is Stairway to Heaven, live in New York, 1973, on The Song Remains the Same. For the one reason that the guitar solo is extended. Now, this song is a very epic song. But the guitar solo on the studio version is, like, about 30 seconds long. But the guitar solo feels like it deserves to be longer. On this such an epic song, I feel like the guitar solo should be 90 seconds to 2 minutes at least. So that's why I prefer the live version. Also, I prefer Robert Plant's vocal performance on the live version, actually. So that's my favorite version. But yeah, the guitar solo, great as it is, feels a little bit too short. And as I mentioned at the end, where Robert Plant's just singing his face off, it ends on a great note. And yeah, Stairway to Heaven. I mean, it's Stairway to Heaven. And now we move on to Misty Mountain Hop. Now this is sort of this song and the next song are probably the least famous of the album, but they're still pretty good songs. Misty Mountain Hop is just a really, really catchy groove. I really like that groove. It's just much more upbeat than Stairway and Battle of Evermore. Yeah, it's just a really, really good song, doesn't drag, and I like the vocal sort of screams at the end by Robert Plant. So yeah, it's just really that great groove. Now we move on to Four Sticks. Now this is probably my least favorite. The riff or the groove or whatever you want to call it doesn't work quite as well for me on this song, Four Sticks, and it's got a bit of that acoustic element from Battle of Evermore. But it just feels like a bit of a filler. Doesn't really feel that special, but it's still a good song. And now we move on to Going to California. Now this is the folk song off of this album, the really, really famous folk song, and it's obviously just some beautiful work by Jimmy Page, obviously, and it's just an amazing vocal performance. Robert Plant's just allowed to just sing his heart out, and it just sounds absolutely amazing. Really beautiful song. I really like it. Right, and the last track we have is When the Levee Breaks. Now, this is actually kind of foreshadowing to an idea that they would do on Kashmir, which is a really long, epic song that's all based around this one idea, and that is the sort of the groove or the riff that's played throughout most of the song. And this idea is that this constant sense of movement, like we're constantly progressing, just like Kashmir off Physical Graffiti, which we'll talk about when we get there. But this song is just absolutely amazing. That drum intro, best drum intro in terms of the production quality. Sounds so crisp, so crisp, so clear. John Bonham's amazing drummer. It just sounds amazing. Throughout this whole song and the whole album, really, really good, clean drumming. The groove is just really addictive, and there's obviously the constant sense of movement, which I've been talking about. It's not too long. It feels paced correctly, just like Stairway. It's like a sort of 8 or 9 minute song, but it all works together, all meshes really well. Really, really nice lyrics, and it's just an absolutely amazing way to end this album. Now that concludes the track by track. Now, Led Zeppelin IV is quite a hard album to review because it's so famous, and most people, really, really like this album. But I think really what makes this such an iconic album is the performance, for one, but also its relative accessibility compared to the previous albums, which I really like, and I like this album, but this album just has a sound that sounds more accessible. But the driving force between, for the reason why it's as good as it is just the writing. Yeah, great writing, good performance overall, really, really good album, so I'm going to give Led Zeppelin IV a 10 out of 10. Later.